Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Apologies for the delayed start. We're having some technical issues, but thank you so much for joining us. This is AIA Colorado's Committee on the Environment, Session 3. Our focus topic today is on embodied carbon, focusing on regulations, LEED v5, and the contractor's role. We have an exciting presentation for you. Victoria and Mark are with us. I'll introduce them in a minute. As Victoria is getting everything set up, I want to put a plug out there for our upcoming session. This is for our session for Beyond the Surface, Vetting Materials for Health, Carbon, and Impact. We're going to be having Green Badger's founder and CEO, Tommy Lindstroth, and we're going to be looking at selection criteria and resources, industry trends, occupant health, and material pledge guidelines. So I will put a link to that one here in the chat if you haven't had a chance to sign up for that one yet. We hope you are able to join us. That's June 19th at noon, virtual meeting as well. Today's session, you will be getting one AIA, CEU, and HSW credit. If you haven't already, please put your first and last name in the chat. If you signed up with your AIA number, then you will be getting continuing education. If you didn't include your number with your registration, you can include it with your first and last name in the chat. I will be your moderator today. My name is Marisol Foreman. I'm the owner at Marisol Studios. Throughout the presentation, if you have questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat and we'll go through those at the end. I can either read those out loud or we can give you an opportunity to ask your question and go through those with the presenters. Our speakers today are Victoria Herrero-Garcia. She is an LCA specialist, lead AP BD+C, and she is the embodied carbon leader at Mead and Hunt. We also have Mark Rothman with us. He is the director of design and sustainability at Hensel Phelps. So I will be presenting my screen with throughout the presentation. So Mark and Victoria, let me know when you want me to advance. We have our learning objectives up here as part of the continuing education requirements. And I will pass it off to both of you. Victoria, are you ready to go?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
I can hear and I can see you. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My sincere apologies. I have been presenting for many years now, and I have never had this hiccup before, so it was a super technical difficulty for real. So let's get into the presentation, and I'm going to cover some of the key terms related to embodied carbon. If you can move forward, Marisol, thank you. And I'm not sure who is in the audience, if you have too much knowledge, a lot of knowledge or a little bit. Either way, embodied carbon relates to the carbon emissions to materials used in a project. For the most part, no. For some of you, you might have seen also GWP, or global warming potential, as another way to call embodied carbon. The unit of measurement is normally kilograms of CO2 equivalent, and the equivalent it's because it includes all greenhouse gases, not just CO2. Next, please. Within the embodied carbon, we report in different life cycle stages. So this GWP value, global warming potential, can be from the product stage, from the construction usage, or the end of life. And there's another stage that is beyond the end of life and normally reported separately. Next. If we go to how things are called based on the modules that are included in life cycle stage, it is A1 through A3 for product stage, A4 through A5 for construction, B1 through B6 for the use, and the end of life is normally C1 through C4. And module D, as I mentioned, is normally reported separately because can overlap with some of the end of life modules. Next. Important to know that life cycle stages A1 through A3 for product stage. You can click, Marisol, there's a few animations on this. Is what is called the system boundary, cradle to gate. So for those of you have heard before, cradle to gate is pretty much from when is the raw material extracted to when the end of manufacturing. Next. The same for additional life cycle stages. If we include all the way through the end of life, is what is normally called cradle to grave. So that system boundary is cradle to grave and includes life cycle stages A1 through C4. How do we know what the global warming potential value of a product, what is it exactly, what the number is? It comes in an environmental product declaration. So this is a document that includes sort of a nutritional label with not just the global warming potential, but also different environmental impact categories. And in order for us to be able to compare a product against another product, there are certain things that we need to make sure that they are the same. So declared unit will be one. So we need to make sure that we have the same unit for comparison, the same. We will want to know if this is a product specific or is an industry wide. And the difference between one or the other is that the industry wide EPD includes data from different manufacturers that are part of a certain association, for example, the Steel Association. And a product specific is specific to a manufacturer and that product manufacturing process. Type 3 EPD, meaning that it has been externally verified. It is important to know if it is externally verified for many compliant regulation, compliance path and regulatory mandates across the nation. You will need a Type 3 EPD. And of course, the expiration date is very important to know that it has not been expired. And highlighted there at the end, we want to know that value GWP. Next, please. When we compare different ways for compliance for embodied carbon reductions, we have the prescriptive path, for example, and that is that meaning that A1 through A3. Click next, Marisol, please. On A1 through A3 is the highest impact on all life cycle stages for the most part, unless you have building reuse or mass timber will be reduced, but it still will be the biggest chunk of the total whole building LCA. So that's why it does exist a prescriptive path. Next, please. Which includes regulations from different states, and this has been called by clean. And this is representing different states who have passed by clean state policy. And as you can see, there's some in different colors. So the yellow includes building and infrastructure. The orange includes only infrastructure. Yes, and then the other one, the blue, is only buildings. And then there are some states that have introduced the bills but have not passed yet. Next. However, a Rocky Mountain Institute study completed for federal projects, if you look at the line, the blue, darker blue line, I'm not sure why everything is blue, I apologize, but the bottom line is the darker blue. If you look at that line, can you click next one? It will not get to zero, it will get to zero, but the above line will not get to zero by 2040. and that represents only by clean policy. So only prescriptive path will not get us to zero by 2040. If we want to accomplish that, we will have to include whole building life cycle assessment into the equation. Next, please. And that is when we include A1 through C4. So that will be the whole building life cycle assessment. Next. The only state currently that has included requirements for embodied carbon reductions is the code Cal Green in California, and it has three different options to meet the requirements: the building reuse, life cycle assessment, or life cycle analysis, and the prescriptive path. So this is the only, currently the only state and code in the country that includes those requirements. Next. So we have discussed two different ways for embodied carbon reductions that are included in different codes and regulations, the prescriptive path and the performance path. However, when you're doing the performance path, there's always a comparison to a baseline, and that can be a little subjective because not everybody creates baselines the same way. It's not as straightforward as the ASHRAE 90.1 guidance for energy. So what we are trying to accomplish, all practitioners, is to determine an embodied carbon intensity, and that is kilograms of CO2 per square meter of your building. It is similar for those familiar to an EUI, energy use intensity. So that is what we are trying to accomplish. The Carbon Leadership Forum benchmark study version 2 recently released in March of 2025, and that it includes around 500 buildings across the nation. Yes, it's not a very comprehensive data set, but it is at least something, the best that we have at this moment, and includes building typology and locations, and based on what the scope that is included in your analysis. So if you include only a structural and enclosure, you will have different results than if you have a structural enclosure interiors or even MEP or hardscape. So there are separated by life cycle stages, by building type and location. Next. So how these apply to what the LEED V5 and embodied carbon requirements are coming. Next slide. The embodied carbon on LEED V4, it was only one credit. It was optional. You didn't need to use it if you didn't want it. And now that credit has been broken down in to several categories in LEED V5. So we have the prerequisite, and that includes assess and quantify the embodied carbon. And I will cover a little bit more of detail of what is included. And then the building and material reuse, and then the reduced embodied carbon credit itself. So from 5 points maximum, we are now to 9 points maximum and one prerequisite. Next. One of the new prerequisites that it was not mentioned in the previous slide, but it includes a portion of the assessment for embodied carbon from the prerequisite is the carbon assessment, which it is a 25-year projection for the following prerequisites: the operational carbon, the refrigerants, the embodied carbon, and then optional is to include also the transportation demand management, which is a credit instead of prerequisite, but can be included. And it needs to be, all the emissions need to be reported per square foot. So the same as I was mentioning, the embodied carbon intensity normally is reported in international unit, but since we're in the US, USGBC is requesting in a square footage. This 25-year projection at the beginning of the prerequisite, when it was released for public comment, they were requesting all the teams to provide the 25-year projection. Now you will provide the information for each of the prerequisites, and the USGBC will put all the information together and report back to the team with this 25-year projection. Next. So one of the examples that we have done at Mead and Hunt is the Appleton International Airport. This was during early design, and we did complete an assessment for all the what it will be, all the prerequisites for LEED B5. Next. So the projection, our 25-year forecast emissions projections and ATW, as you can see, the highest emissions come from embodied carbon on the first year of operations, and then we have, after 20 years, there will be also some replacements for some of the enclosure materials of the for embodied carbon, and then also the assumption of the equipment being replaced. Of course, equipment doesn't get replaced all at once the same year, but for the purpose of the exercise, we assume that everything based on manufacturer's guidance is 20 years, everything gets replaced. So that is the peak there on the refrigerant emissions. Next. So the prerequisites themselves within the material and resources category, it is the assess and quantify embodied carbon, and the difference between the previous version of LEED and this version is that now we want to include also hardscape. Before it was only a structure and enclosure what was required, but now hardscape was also included. For these, you can do it using a software, you can do it manually, but you will need the quantity of each of those materials, part of the structure and enclosure and hardscape, and multiply it by the GWP value only through the product stages, so that A1 through A3. And then the goal of this prerequisite is identifying the highest, the high priority materials. Next slide. And again, this makes sense why A1 through A3 only, why they determined that, because for most projects, that is the highest impact that we have. Next slide. And then when, for example, this is also from the ATW project, and the biggest impact, so we use one-click LCA to complete the whole building life cycle assessment. So I know that the prerequisite and all of the credits have different paths for you to follow if you want to achieve reductions or not, or just complete the assessments. However, using a whole building LCA tool will allow you to comply with all the prerequisites and all the credits as well, and accomplish the highest amount of points. So with the whole building LCA, we found that the biggest impacts came from steel, concrete, and insulation for this project. Next slide. So going to the credit now, excuse me, the building and material reuse, and it is broken in two parts. One is if you reuse a whole building or portions of the building, and the other one also gives points or credit to design teams that include any deconstruction goals into the design goals and achieve by deconstructing the building and having those materials being salvaged or reused in another project, or you can also reuse or salvage in your project from other projects externally. Next. This is a case study that we completed for Madison Metro. This was done during design development. Next. And for the enclosure quantities, don't get hung up. The percentages are all based on the percentage quantities. Every Material has different units, so it was all determined by percentage of the total quantities. So for facade, we do have 100% of the facade will be new materials versus the roof that 58% will be reused. 58% will be reused. My apologies, I'm looking at the slides on my phone and they are really small. So if I say a number wrong, apologize. And the structural quantities overall, 65% will be reused and 35% is new materials. And for the facade, there are portions of the facade that is, there are structural walls. So you have to determine where you're going to put them. If you're going to put them in your structural or in your enclosure, it cannot be in both. So we determined to put it in the structural quantities. So the benefit of doing this project is pursuing version 4.1, not V5 yet. But the benefit of doing a whole building LCA, even if you know that you're going to have a building reuse, is that it gives you maximizing the amount of points that you can get, combining the two options, plus exemplary performance that for this project we are able to achieve as well. So the global warming potential reductions were over 38%. And then we have over all the other impact categories more than 10%. So we are able to maximize the amount of points, close to maximizing the amount of points. We're not to the 40%, but between the reuse and the new construction. And I have a slide that will show that later. Next. So the credit for reducing embodied carbon, it has up to 6 points, and there are different pathways to meet the requirements. There's option 1, that is the whole building LCA, which gives you the maximum amount of points. And as you can see, like it is also, even doing just the whole building LCA will give you more points than if you do the prescriptive path doing EPD only. And for option 4, I want to mention we have Mark with us today, and he will cover the contractor side of things. But the most exciting thing about this new rating system, new version of the rating system, is that now it will also incentivize projects to track and report A5 emissions, which are the construction excuse me, construction site emissions. Next. So a case study for these, for the whole building LCA. Again, all these projects are not pursuing LEED V5, unfortunately, yet, but it is version 4.1. This was completed during design development. The architect is D2C Architects, and thank you for the rendering. Next, please. And CPW Fort Collins, at the beginning of the project was a discussion of if using steel or mass timber. It is a one-story, as you saw there. They have some high ceilings in some areas, but it's a one-story building. So the project decided to follow through with mass timber, but this was an analysis during the schematic design. And as you can see, we were able to achieve 38% reductions. And this is not including any biogenic carbon. So for LEED documentation, you cannot get credit for using biogenic carbon. But if you add that biogenic carbon, the global warming potential will be reduced even further. Next. One of the exciting things for this project too is that we have early conversations and discussions to incorporate material reuse. And although it is a little bit more complicated because of grading and visual grading of the stats to be used in a building enclosure for structural purposes, we are going to use it for interior partitions and also for the blocking of the enclosure. Next. When we look at the points that we will get for this project under LEED V5, next, we will be able to achieve 5 points, but then we are, and I think I didn't, it's a total of 6 points because there is material reuse as well. There's a typo there, apologies. So it will be a total of 6 points, 5 points for over 30% reductions, and 1 additional point for the material reuse on the enclosure portion of the building. And then back to the Madison project, if we were to pursue this project under LEED V5, click next, Marisol, thank you. It was 38%. We were close to the 40, but not there. But we can combine different options. So different options, now different credits to maximize the amount of points. And here we will get 5 points for path 4 over 30% reductions and 3 points under the building reuse. So a total of 8 points. So you can see how the decarbonization or the embodied carbon reductions play a big role now on LEED V5, and utilizing tools as whole building LCA, it will maximize the amount of points that your project can achieve. Next, please. One thing very important, this is only new construction. The commercial interiors had a different, slightly different requirements for a LEED Platinum. But besides all the energy credits that are required also for embodied carbon, you need to achieve 20% reductions to be able to achieve LEED Platinum. Next. And I'm going to pass it now to Mark. Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about embodied carbon reduction in Colorado. So some of the laws, and Marisol, or I'm sorry, Victoria, please jump in when you want to. So embodied carbon regulations and pathways in Colorado. So you have Buy Clean Colorado, Colorado Model Green Code, Denver Green Code, and then there's a Denver embodied carbon pilot framework, which isn't mandatory at this time. You can see how each one of these regulations, whether it's prescriptive, performance, or reuse. Next slide. So there's been a couple proposed bills. So Senate Bill 25-182, embodied carbon reductions. So in the flurry of bills that made it to the governor's desk, I think it was last week or the week before, this one made it. So it's on the governor's desk for approval, and that allows the C-PACE financial incentive. House Bill 25-1119 is a bill that is similar and would really require the same requirements that California currently has, and that has been postponed indefinitely. Next slide. And then Colorado tax exemption. So starting of July 1st of last year, you're eligible. You can click one more time, please. Oh, there's a whole bunch there. So there you go. So any project in Colorado is eligible. Any eligible material procured in Colorado with a GWP lower than the OSA threshold. And then there's a Colorado sales tax lookup page. I'm going through this process right now on a building that we're building. And it is, I wouldn't say it's complicated, but it will take some time. So don't try to collect your exemptions at the very end. Next slide. So I'm going to focus maybe more from the contractor's point of view, even though I am an architect, but I work for a contractor. The question that we see quite often now in the marketplace is who owns embodied carbon. And in fact, one of our insurance carriers held a seminar on this on Tuesday of this week. In the design bid build world, the embodied carbon is owned by the design team and the owner. In the CM at risk world, it's kind of that fuzzy implied relationship between the owner, the contractor, and the architect. They hire the contractor usually after the design team to provide insight, do some estimating, help guide the project along, but ultimately the design team is still writing the specifications. And then finally, in design build, the way most design build contracts are written, the requirement for embodied carbon will be captured with the design builder. Now that design builder could potentially pass that along through contracts to the design team, but still ultimately resides with the design builder. One thing that I recommend from experience is that if you're working with an owner that says they want to reduce embodied carbon, but they don't provide specific targets, I highly recommend specific targets, particularly if there's going to be contract language around reducing embodied carbon. I have a project going right now that did not have specific targets, and it's very difficult to say you're meeting the contract requirements. So highly recommend making sure that the targets are clearly identified. Next slide. So we've seen this, and I don't want to dwell on it too much. What I'm going to really focus on here is the A4 and the A5. That's the embodied carbon during construction. So A4 is the transportation of materials to the project site, and A5 is the installation of those materials and the resources used to do that. Next slide. So what's the process for a contractor? And maybe it's not all contractors, but this is our process. So the process starts at project award by identifying the goals, kind of like I just mentioned previously. Waiting until design starts and documents are being developed is not ideal. You really want to start identifying the goals at the project award. And you want to communicate those goals during onboarding and orientation to new team members, whether they're new design team members or stakeholders or trade partners. Specifications shall require EPDs. So for instance, on design build projects, we are writing those requirements right into our specifications. So the Hensel Phelps actually has a specification that we work with the design teams on to get it first into Division 1 and then throughout the remainder of the spec. And then we have developed contract language for our trade partners, which I'll show you in a second. We have a process called the job information packet. Basically, it's just a toolkit for trade partners, what they need to do, how they need to get paid, what their requirements are. I'll show you a little bit about that. And then finally, pay applications are tied to compliance. Next slide. So I'm not going to read it all for you, but in California, we have the California Air Resources Board requirements. So we've actually put that language directly into our trade partner contracts. But in order for us to track A5, we've actually also put another clause in there, and that's fuel tracking. So we require our subcontractors to submit fuel records. And if they don't submit those records, we can withhold their pay. So we're actually tying their requirement to provide this information to their pay applications. Next slide. And so this is it's a very simple form, the fuel tracking log. So right now they can fill it out by hand. I'll show you a snippet here in a second of some of the technology we're using, but the technology reads the information on this form in the background and then calculates the carbon emissions automatically for us. The goal here for us is not to impact our site operations by having to add a whole bunch more individuals to the project in order to track all this data. So we're trying to do it behind the scenes with the use of technology and AI. Next slide. So one of the things that we've run into, and this is an example of a material specification on a CM as at risk project, is that we have found that the process needs to be much more collaborative in the development of material specifications than it ever has in the past. Meaning, typically, design teams will put together their specifications. they get submitted with the documents, you move forward. But in a CM at risk or design build realm, if the contractor has a responsibility or owns the carbon reduction, it's really a team environment. And I say that Hensel Phelps will build whatever somebody wants us to build, the most sustainable building to the least sustainable building. And the reason why I say that is we work in multiple jurisdictions all around the country, and the goals that we have set for our company might not align with the goals that some of our clients have. So reducing carbon by 30% is a great goal, but you may have some clients that are not interested in that pursuit. So it's up to the design team and the contractor then to educate those owners and say, look, you can get a 30% reduction in concrete, but and it won't cost you any more to do that. That's very easy to achieve on the West Coast. It's less easy to achieve in other regions of the United States, at least at this time. So I really highly recommend that you be transparent and open with your owners and make sure that you can actually achieve the goals. Another example is we're doing a project in the South. The owner is based out of Northern California. They have set goals, but unfortunately, what they neglected to do was to look at where they were building the building and whether or not the goals that they have set, which again are easily achievable in California, could they be achieved in a state in the south of the United States? And in this case, the answer was no. So it's very difficult to achieve some of these things if you're not paying attention to the regional capabilities of suppliers. And then finally, the last example I have is particularly in design build and progressive design build, we had a project. We asked the design team straight away, there's a requirement to reduce embodied carbon in the building. We were bringing on trade partners very early in the project. During schematic design, we were bringing on our steel fabricator. And so how can we asked the team, what can we do to reduce embodied carbon in the steel? So we kicked around ideas like electric blast furnaces and things like that. The steel fabricator actually told the design team what types of steel that they should stay away from, because those would be more problematic to get in a reduced carbon. But we bought the steel out at 60% drawing. So say right around design development, when we got the 100% steel or the 100% steel spec, right around 90% complete documents, there was a requirement for 30% carbon reduction. And there was a disconnect between the structural engineer of record, who was located where the project is, and their specification writer, who was not. But we had already bought the steel. So we had to go back and modify the spec to make sure it was compliant with what we'd already purchased. Next spec, or next page, please. So some of the tools that we're using. So this is a tool that we use to track whole building embodied carbon. And I recommend as much as you can, if you can do a whole building embodied carbon analysis. It's much more difficult, but it gives you a better picture of where you're really at. We have clients that only want to talk about certain concrete mixes. Not all of the concrete, just certain concrete mixes. So it really makes the process inefficient if you're not looking at the whole building. So if you can look at the whole building, that's great. So this chart's looking at A1 through C4, and you can see the operational carbon makes up 82% of the embodied carbon, and then 18% is materials and construction, which is A1 through A5. And then by looking at the building as a whole building, you can start to dial down into the components of the building. And you can see manufacturing, which is A1 through A3, is 6%. Transportation which is A4, is 2%, and construction, which is A5, is 2%. So you can really get into the weeds and start to look at what all the components are and what you can do to reduce carbon in your building. Next slide. And then diving down into some of those building elements. So you can see here, structure, enclosure, interior, and services, and how they make up the building. So 38% of this building, 38 percent of the carbon is in structure, 28% enclosure. This happens to be a mass timber building, which is the other. And so that's why there's 20% there. But we can dive down into these materials, and then you can go even further, and you can go into these materials and then start comparing materials, say for ready mix or brick or insulation. You can actually start comparing specific materials and their EPDs, and then hopefully make selections that reduce the embodied carbon over something else that might have a higher embodied carbon content. You really have to engage your owners and your design team early on in order to do this work. We're using this tool and helping our teams through it, but it really takes everybody to be involved to make these decisions. Next slide. So just to revisit the MRC2, which is reduce embodied carbon. We talked about this a little bit, so I'll go to the next slide. The real meat of this slide for what I do is tracking carbon emissions from construction activities. And that goes back to that contract language that I mentioned, where we are having our subcontractors provide us their fuel data. And so technically, since, you know, on the project where they're providing me fuel data, then I should theoretically be able to get the 2 points, right? Because I'm tracking, and I'm also tracking utility usage. You'll see that in the next slide. So you should be able to achieve those points if you plan ahead. It is very difficult to go back and get this information if you haven't put this in contracts and if you haven't put the procedures in place to collect it. Next slide. And then finally, this shows the electricity and purchased energy. Purchased energy is gas, in this case diesel, across. You can look at it over a period of months. We can also roll this up into an enterprise overview. So for instance, the California law, and if Colorado had passed it, we would have to report at the enterprise level. They're not looking at project level. But this information at the project level, if I was working with a client that is reporting their data, I would report this data to the client. It's scope 3 data, and they would be able to do, whether it's GRESB or CDP or something like that, they would be able to add this information to their report out. And that's it. It's our last slide. So we're open for questions.
Thank you, Victoria and Mark. I didn't see any questions come through in the chat. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask to our presenters, feel free to unmute yourself, share your video if you'd like, and go ahead and ask your questions now. Okay, so I'll have one to start. Mark, when you are asking your subs to start tracking their fuel usage, how has that process been, getting that, if they're handwriting it or submitting that to you? Has there been any pushback, or have they been pretty eager to participate in this?
It's been a mixed bag for participation, but once we put it into their contracts, we realized very early on that we were going to have to put it in contracts in order to get good compliance. So once we did that, and then again, they go through that job information process where they get that packet and it outlines what they have to do. We have not had any issues once we started doing it that way. When we asked for volunteers, yeah, not very good compliance. So we learned very quickly that we were going to have to put all that into contracts.
I'm sure. Zach Wilson with CCY asked, Mark, what software was used for your WB embodied carbon visuals?
So two softwares were used. The one that we're using for the whole building is Tangible Materials. And then the other one that we're using for our A5 is Gravity Climate. There's many more out there. There's a whole bunch. They seem to be coming a new one every day recently. But we've been in a pilot program with Tangible for the last roughly the last 2 years. And so they've been very responsive to our needs and trying to improve their software. They subscribe to EC3 on the back end, just like a lot of others do. So they're using industry standard back end modules to make sure that it would pass any third party rigor.
Let's see, Renee, also with Mead and Hunt, are you finding owners asking more about embodied carbon, or is it still mostly pushed due to LEED or regulations?
On our side, it's a client type, I think, so the more sophisticated clients that have sustainability mandates, particularly public companies, those are the companies that are asking. The client that wanted to do reduced carbon and didn't have a goal was a university. So we are seeing universities come along, and starting to add these requirements into their projects. So and when it varies, and again, we do work around the country, and it's we get a lot of questions in the South and deep West about this. So it's not not happening in certain parts of the country. I don't know the best way to say that. It's happening all over the country, even though regulations might be lessening, particularly at the federal level. But we're still getting calls from all over the country saying, we're moving ahead. We're not looking back. This is what we're going to do. We certainly have some clients that are hesitating, but I would say so far, most of them are head down, move forward. This is what our mandate is.
And from our end on the consulting side, it depends on location of the project. We also work nationally, but most of the time it is led by a rating system or a regulation. We are currently working on two Buy Clean Colorado projects, for example. So that is only following a prescriptive path. We do have some projects in California that coming up with the code next year, because the requirement will be, the threshold will be under 50,000 square feet. And right now it's 100,000 square feet, which is a little bit harder to have. The size of the projects that we have is not that, they're not that big. So I think the biggest drive is based on regulations and or rating system to be met. Although there are some clients that might be interested, there's in our side normally is more design team led also. So there's a lot of design teams that are very interested and trying to reduce embodied carbon from the design team, but it comes to a little silo of a conversation where the client is not very involved or not even aware that the design team is doing it. So if you're one of the design teams, which is great, don't get me wrong, I'm really grateful that there are design teams all over the country and in Colorado thinking about this. But I think at least at the very least, include that in your narratives, include that in as Mark was saying, in your contracts and in your specifications for sure, because sometimes the owner early in design, because sometimes the owner might see it and pull it out of contract or pull it out of the specifications. So having that transparency and conversations and explaining owners why this is important to a design team, and making sure that the conversation is clear that there are reductions, as Mark mentioned, on concrete, and there's low-hanging fruit that can be accomplishing reductions without additional cost, then everybody will be on board and more comfortable, including the contractor, from early conversations, than if there are surprises and then like Mark's example of 30% goal for the design team or your company, but then the owner might not be aligning with that, or the general contractor, or based on the location of your building, might not be achievable.
I would add very briefly, if you're not familiar with LEED V5, there's great tools out there from the USGBC, but on average, 50% of the new credits, or 50% of the credits are now focused on decarbonization. So it's a shift from LEED V4.1. So if you have an owner who, in their, say, a municipal code or something where they always say, we always have to get to LEED Gold, and that's what we do, you need to exercise some caution, because getting to LEED Gold in V5 is not the same as getting to LEED Gold in 4.1. So make sure that if somebody wants to move to LEED V5, that you're all approaching that from a collaborative approach.
Good, great tips. We probably have time for one more question if somebody has one that's been waiting. All right. And I might just ask Mark and Victoria, what if you have great resources for embodied carbon as you're going through the process that you like to reference, that you could share with the group as well.
I just want to mention one thing in regards to Bike Lane Colorado. So if any of you have any projects that needs to comply with Bike Lane Colorado, make sure that you are looking at the reported global warming potential in the EPD. EC3 is a great tool, but it adds up a certain level of uncertainty to the EPD, reported EPD, based on how the calculations were done. And so it has been verified by their team, and they add a certain level of uncertainty to that total GWP that you see on the main screen, if anybody has used it. And that is not the one that it is for compliant with Bike Lane Colorado. So just make sure that you look at the reported EPD, at the reported GWP value, instead of the one, if you're looking for products that will comply, it might mislead you with certain products and their GWPs on EC3 tool.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any specific. There's so many coming on the market right now. And some are geared towards designers, some are geared towards contractors. A lot of the tools are geared towards developers and real estate, development companies. And that's been my personal frustration, is that it's been slower to come to the AEC side of things. Everybody's been focused on developing tools for the real estate market, but they're getting there. There's 2 or 3 that have been now focusing on contractors and the AEC market. So happy to offline, because I actually need to drop here quickly, but if anybody wants to reach out, I'm happy to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for your knowledge, your expertise, and your time today. I want to give a quick plug for our next session, June 19th at 12 p.m. virtual session focusing on materials. I just put the link in the chat. Hope you can join us for that one as well. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.